One cannot help but wonder just how much of this is actually true. Well, a lot more than you think. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of SA Mercs, let's take a trip back to the year 1990, the end of the infamous South African Border War. The South African Border War, also known as the South African Bush War, was a series of conflicts that took place in Zambia, Namibia and Angola between the years 1996 and 1990, wherein the South African Defence Force went up against the PLAN, the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, which was an armed wing of the Southwest African People's Organization, or SWAPO, over Namibia's independence from South Africa, as well as getting involved in the Angolan Civil War in the 1980s between the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, or UNITA, and the People's Armed Forces of Liberation of Angola, or FAPLA, which was an armed wing of the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, or the MPLA. The abbreviations of both movements use the first letters of the words as spelled in Portuguese, which I'm sure as hell not going to attempt to pronounce because I don't speak the language at all. After these conflicts ended in 1989 and peace accords were set up in 1990, and the South African apartheid regime had used millions in military spending, which ultimately resulted in being a total waste since no real victory or goals were achieved. Many of the soldiers who were drafted and trained to fight in the war were left feeling empty and without purpose, especially since the then apartheid regime was beginning to come to an end in the early 90s, and the massive cuts and retrenchments of military personnel and dismantling of various branches of the South African Special Forces, such as the 32nd Battalion, the counter-insurgency branch known as KUFUT, which means crowbar in English, and the CCB, or Civil Cooperation Bureau, which was kind of like a local version of the CIA, but more militant in that they often carried out political assassinations. All of this resulted in a fairly sizable number of former soldiers or Special Forces members being unable to settle back into civilian life, and thus seeing the writing on the wall and seeing other conflicts spring up across the African continent. Many of them decided to offer their services as guns for hire and becoming involved in the mercenary business.